I watched another maid run crying from my house, mascara streaming down her face, and I felt absolutely nothing. She was the 14th one in 2 years. My husband Mark stood in the doorway, that same disappointed look on his face that I had learned to ignore. Born and raised in Georgia, I had always prided myself on maintaining the highest standards, but somewhere along the way, those standards had turned into something else entirely. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because what started as wanting perfection ended with me crying on my kitchen floor in front of a stranger who saw right through me. The first maid quit after 3 days. I had simply asked her to rewash the dishes because I saw a water spot on one of my wine glasses. She handed me her apron and walked out without saying a word. I told Mark she was lazy and unprofessional. He asked me if I had thanked her for anything she did correctly. I changed the subject. The second maid lasted a week before I found her sobbing in the laundry room after I mentioned that the towels were not folded the way my mother taught me. The third maid made it 2 weeks before I criticized the way she arranged the flowers in the living room vase. She cried silently as she packed her things. Mark started keeping track without telling me. He would mark the calendar each time a new maid started and draw a small X when they left. After the 5th maid, he stopped helping me interview replacements. After the 8th, he started working late more often. After the 12th, he suggested I see a therapist. I told him I did not need therapy. I needed staff who could follow simple instructions. The pattern was always the same. They would arrive full of hope and enthusiasm. I would explain my expectations clearly and thoroughly. They would nod and promise to meet my standards. Then the mistakes would start. A cushion placed wrong on the sofa, vegetables cut too large or too small, bathroom mirrors with streaks, garden tools not returned to their exact positions. Each error would build on the previous one until I could no longer contain my frustration. My voice would get sharper, my corrections more frequent, my expectations more detailed. Eventually, they would crack under the pressure and leave in tears. I told myself they were weak. I told myself they lacked work ethic. I told myself that good help was impossible to find these days. Mark stopped responding when I complained about the maids. My sister stopped returning my calls after I criticized her housekeeping during a visit. My mother asked me when I had become so cold. I insisted everyone was being too sensitive. The 15th maid arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. The agency sent her with a warning that she was my last chance. If this one did not work out, they would no longer service my household. The woman who stepped out of the car was not what I expected. She was older than the others, maybe in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a plain blue dress and carried a small brown suitcase. Her face was calm, almost expressionless. She did not smile when I opened the door. Her name was Margaret. She shook my hand firmly and waited for me to speak first. I launched into my usual speech about expectations and standards. I told her about the schedules I had created. I explained the specific way I wanted each room cleaned. I detailed the exact method for folding towels, washing dishes, and organizing the pantry. I spoke for 30 minutes without stopping. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she simply said she understood and asked where to put her things. I showed her to the small room off the kitchen where the maid stayed. She unpacked efficiently and returned to the kitchen in less than 10 minutes. I handed her the schedule and the list of tasks for the day. She glanced at it briefly and got started without questions. I watched her carefully, waiting for the first mistake. She cleaned the kitchen counters in smooth practice motions. She loaded the dishwasher correctly on the first try. She swept the floor in even strokes that missed nothing. I found myself looking for errors that were not there. By lunchtime, she had completed every morning task perfectly. I inspected her work closely, running my fingers along surfaces, checking corners, examining details. Everything was spotless. I felt an unfamiliar frustration rising. I told her the living room windows needed extra attention because they showed every streak. She nodded and cleaned them again. They were flawless. I mentioned that the bathroom grout looked slightly discolored. She scrubbed it until it was white. I suggested the refrigerator shelves could be more organized. She rearranged everything into perfect rows. Mark came home that evening and paused when he saw Margaret. She greeted him politely and returned to her work. He pulled me aside in the hallway and asked how the new maid was doing. I told him she was acceptable so far. He raised his eyebrows and said that was high praise coming from me. I ignored the comment. That night, I created an even more detailed task list for the next day. If Margaret was not going to make obvious mistakes, I would simply increase the difficulty. The next morning, I handed Margaret a schedule that would have taken 2 people to complete. She read through it without expression and started working. I followed her from room to room, pointing out additional tasks, changing previous instructions, adding new requirements. She adjusted without complaint. When I told her to reorganize the linen closet after she had just finished it, because I decided I wanted a different system, she simply began again. When I insisted she rewash the windows she had cleaned the day before because I thought I saw a smudge, she got the cleaning supplies without hesitation. For 3 days I pushed harder and harder. I criticized the angle of the vacuum lines in the carpet. I complained that the pillows on the bed were too fluffy. I claimed the kitchen smelled wrong, even though it was spotless. Margaret absorbed every criticism without reaction. She did not argue. She did not make excuses. She did not cry. Her calm silence infuriated me more than any mistake could have. I found myself inventing problems just to see if I could break her composure. On the 4th day, I woke up with a migraine. The pain throbbed behind my eyes and made every sound feel too loud. I went downstairs and found Margaret already working in the kitchen. The smell of coffee made my stomach turn. I snapped at her to open the windows because the room was stuffy. She opened them immediately. I complained the breeze was too strong. She adjusted them. I said I needed tea instead of coffee. She made tea. I told her it was too hot. She added cold water. Nothing satisfied me. Mark left for work early without saying goodbye. I heard his car pull out of the driveway faster than usual. The sound made my head pound worse. I took my medication and retreated to the living room sofa. Margaret continued working quietly throughout the house. Every small noise she made felt like an assault. The vacuum running in the distant bedroom, the water running in the bathroom, the soft click of cabinet doors closing. I called out corrections from the sofa, even though I could not see what she was doing. She responded to each one without coming to check if I was all right. By afternoon, my migraine had not improved. I had not eaten anything all day. Margaret appeared in the doorway and asked if I needed anything. I told her to leave me alone. She disappeared without another word. 20 minutes later, she returned with a tray. On it was a bowl of plain soup, crackers, and a glass of water with lemon. She set it on the coffee table and started to leave. I asked her who told her to make that. She said nobody. I asked why she thought I wanted soup. She said I looked like I might need something light. I told her I had not asked for it, and she should focus on her actual work. She nodded and left the room. I stared at the soup. Steam rose from the bowl in thin wisps. The smell was simple and clean. My stomach growled despite my nausea. I picked up the spoon and tasted it. It was perfect. Not too salty. Not too bland. The right temperature. I ate the entire bowl and immediately felt better. The migraine began to ease. I set the empty bowl back on the tray and leaned back against the cushions. Margaret had made exactly what I needed without being asked. This had never happened with any of the other maids. They had always waited for specific instructions. They had always asked multiple questions. They had always needed constant guidance. Margaret simply understood and acted. That evening, Mark came home and immediately noticed the change in me. He asked if the migraine had passed. I told him it had. He asked if the new maid was working out. I hesitated before answering. I told him she was different from the others. He asked what I meant. I said she did not react the way they did. He asked if that was good or bad. I admitted I did not know yet. He looked at me strangely and said he hoped I would figure it out before I drove this one away too. The comment stung more than I wanted to admit. Over the next week, I continued testing Margaret. I changed the schedule daily. I added tasks at random times. I inspected her work with increasing scrutiny. She maintained the same calm efficiency through everything. One morning, I told her to dust the entire house from top to bottom. She spent hours carefully cleaning every surface. When she finished, I ran my finger along the top of a high bookshelf and showed her the tiny amount of dust I found. I asked if she considered this acceptable work. She looked at the dust on my finger and then at me. For the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. Not anger, not hurt, something else I could not identify. She got the duster and cleaned the shelf again without saying anything. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the look on Margaret's face. It was not the look of someone breaking under pressure. It was the look of someone seeing something clearly. I got up and went to the kitchen for water. The house was dark and quiet. As I passed the maid's room, I noticed a light under the door. I stopped and listened. I heard nothing. I almost continued to the kitchen, but curiosity made me pause. I knocked softly. Margaret opened the door immediately, still fully dressed. She did not seem surprised to see me at this hour. I asked if everything was all right. She said everything was fine. I asked why she was still awake. She said she often had trouble sleeping. I asked if the room was comfortable enough. She said it was perfect. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. I noticed she was holding a small photograph. Before I could stop myself, I asked what she was looking at. She hesitated, then handed me the photo. It showed a young woman with a bright smile, standing in front of a house. I asked who it was. Margaret said it was her daughter. I asked where her daughter was now. Margaret said she passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. She was only 28. I held the photograph carefully and did not know what to say. Margaret took it back gently and asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head and returned to my bedroom. I lay awake for hours thinking about that photo. Margaret had lost her daughter. She had experienced real tragedy, real pain. Yet she came to work every day and endured my impossible demands without complaint. She absorbed my constant criticism without breaking. She showed me more patience and grace than I had ever shown anyone. The realization made my chest feel tight. The next morning, I watched Margaret work with new eyes. I noticed things I had missed before. The care she took with each task, even when I was not watching. The gentle way she handled my belongings. The quiet respect she showed for the home. She was not just cleaning. She was tending. She was caring. She was giving something I did not deserve. I thought about all the other maids I had driven away. I thought about their tears and their hurt and their wounded pride. I thought about how I had felt nothing when they left. I began to test Margaret differently. Instead of looking for mistakes, I started looking for reasons to thank her. When she finished cleaning the bathroom, I told her it looked nice. She paused and looked at me with slight surprise. When she prepared lunch, I complimented the presentation. When she organized the pantry, I mentioned how much easier it was to find things. Each time, she accepted the praise with a simple nod and continued working. She did not smile. She did not relax. She seemed to be waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mark noticed the change immediately. He asked what had happened with the maid. I told him I was trying something different. He said he could tell and that it was about time. His words carried an edge I had not heard before. I asked what he meant. He said he had watched me become someone he barely recognized. He said the woman he married had been kind and warm and full of joy. He said that woman had disappeared gradually over the years, replaced by someone who found fault in everything and happiness in nothing. He said he had stayed silent too long, hoping I would see it myself. His voice cracked when he said he was tired of living in a house filled with tension and criticism and impossible standards. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain that I was just trying to maintain order and quality and excellence, but the words stuck in my throat. I thought about the 14 maids who had left in tears. I thought about my sister who stopped calling. I thought about my mother asking when I had become so cold. I thought about Mark working late and avoiding home. I thought about Margaret's calm face and her dead daughter and her endless patience with my cruelty. The truth crashed over me like a wave. I was the problem. I had always been the problem. Everything I had blamed on others was really about me. Now this is where I did something that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. The next morning, I asked Margaret to sit with me at the kitchen table. She hesitated, clearly uncertain about breaking the formal boundary between employer and employee. I insisted gently. She sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. I told her I wanted to explain something. I told her about my childhood in Georgia, growing up in a house where nothing was ever good enough. I told her about my father who measured love in achievements, and my mother who believed affection had to be earned. I told her about learning that approval came only through perfection and that mistakes meant rejection. I told her about the pressure that built over years of trying to be flawless. I told her about the anxiety that made every small error feel like a catastrophe. I told her about the control I needed over my environment because everything else felt chaotic. I told her about the standards I set for others because I set the same impossible standards for myself. I told her about the voice in my head that constantly found fault, constantly criticized, constantly demanded more. I told her that voice had been with me so long I thought it was normal. I thought everyone heard it. I thought everyone felt this way. Margaret listened without interrupting. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes showed she was really hearing me. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me a simple question. She asked if I was happy. The question shocked me. Nobody had asked me that in years. I tried to answer but could not. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I realized I could not remember the last time I felt genuinely happy. I could not remember the last time I laughed without strain. I could not remember the last time I relaxed without guilt. I could not remember the last time I felt at peace. Margaret reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The gesture was so unexpected that I flinched. She did not pull away. She kept her hand there, warm and steady. She told me that her daughter had spent the last 6 months of her life teaching Margaret about what really mattered. She said her daughter had told her that perfection was a prison and that love required mess and that life was too short to waste on things that did not bring joy. She said watching someone die changed how you saw everything. She said the little things I obsessed over would not matter at all when my time came. She said the only thing that would matter was whether I had loved people well and let people love me. Something broke inside me. Not a sharp break. A slow crumbling, like a dam developing cracks. I felt tears start to form and tried to stop them. I had not cried in front of They spilled over and ran down my cheeks. My shoulders started shaking. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to pull my hand away from Margaret's, but she held on gently. She told me it was all right. She told me I could let it out. She told me I was safe. The tears turned into sobs. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I had kept locked away for decades. I cried for the little girl who learned love was conditional. I cried for the woman who built walls so high she could not see over them anymore. I cried for the 14 maids I had hurt. I cried for my sister and my mother and my husband who had watched me disappear. I cried for all the years I had spent chasing something that did not exist. I cried because Margaret, this woman who had every reason to hate me, was showing me more compassion than I had shown anyone in my entire adult life. Margaret did not try to stop me. She did not offer empty reassurances. She just sat there holding my hand while I fell apart. When the sobs finally quieted, she got up and brought me tissues. She poured me a glass of water. She waited until I could breathe normally again. Then she asked if I wanted to know why she had not quit. I nodded, unable to speak yet. She said she saw her daughter in me. Not the kind parts, the suffering parts. She said her daughter had been anxious and controlling in the months before her diagnosis. She said she had pushed people away and demanded perfection because she was terrified of the chaos she felt inside. She said Margaret had not understood it then. She had fought with her daughter about it. She had told her to relax and stop being so difficult. She said she regretted those words every single day since her daughter died. Margaret said when she met me and saw my behavior, she recognized the same pain. She said she knew I was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. She said she knew I was drowning and lashing out because I did not know how else to stay afloat. She said she decided to stay because maybe she could help me in a way she had failed to help her daughter. She said maybe she could be patient and steady and present until I was ready to see what I was really fighting. She said she did not know if it would work. She said she just knew she had to try. I started crying again, but softer this time. I told her I was sorry. I told her she did not deserve the way I had treated her. I told her I did not know how to fix what I had broken. She said I had already started by seeing it. She said awareness was the first step. She said change would not happen overnight. She said I would have moments where old patterns returned. She said that was normal and okay. She said the important thing was to keep trying. She said to be as patient with myself as I needed to learn to be with others. She said healing was not linear. She said it was messy and uncomfortable and necessary. We sat in the kitchen for over an hour. I told her things I had never told anyone. I told her about the panic attacks I had in private. I told her about the insomnia and the constant worry and the feeling that I was always one mistake away from everything falling apart. I told her about the isolation and the loneliness and how I had no close friends anymore. I told her about watching Mark become distant and not knowing how to reach him. I told her I was scared that I had damaged things beyond repair. She listened to all of it without judgment. When I finally went quiet, Margaret asked if I had ever told Mark these things. I shook my head. She suggested that might be a good place to start. She said he had stayed through everything, which meant he still cared. She said people could forgive a lot if they understood the why behind the behavior. She said vulnerability was frightening but necessary for real connection. She said hiding my struggle had protected me from nothing and cost me everything. I knew she was right. I knew I needed to talk to Mark. The thought terrified me. That evening, I waited for Mark to come home. My hands shook as I heard his car in the driveway. He walked in looking tired and weary. He asked if everything was okay. I asked him to sit down because I needed to talk. His expression shifted to concern. He sat on the edge of the sofa like he was preparing for bad news. I sat across from him and took a deep breath. Then I told him everything I had told Margaret. I told him about my childhood and the pressure and the anxiety and the impossible standards. I told him how sorry I was for becoming someone he did not recognize. I told him I had not seen it happening until it was almost too late. Mark listened with his jaw tight. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. I watched emotions cross his face. Anger, sadness, relief, confusion. Finally, he asked why I had never told him any of this before. I said I was ashamed. I said I thought I should be stronger. I said I thought admitting struggle meant admitting failure. He said that was the stupidest thing he had ever heard. He said marriage meant sharing burdens, not carrying them alone. He said he had spent 2 years watching me suffer and feeling helpless because I would not let him in. He said he had considered leaving multiple times because living with someone who would not be vulnerable was like living with a stranger. His words hurt because they were true. I had shut him out completely. I had built walls, even against the person who loved me most. I had chosen the illusion of control over real intimacy. I asked if it was too late to fix things. He said he did not know. He said he wanted to believe we could repair this, but trust had been damaged. He said he needed to see sustained change, not just promises. He said he needed to see me actually address the underlying issues, not just manage symptoms. He said he needed me to let him be my partner instead of another person I tried to control. I told him I understood. I told him I would do whatever it took. I told him I would find a therapist. I told him I would work on myself, even if he decided to leave. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said he did not want to leave. He said he wanted his wife back. He said he wanted the woman he married who laughed easily and loved freely and did not flinch at imperfection. He said he wanted to feel close to me again instead of walking on eggshells. He said he wanted a home that felt warm instead of tense. I reached for his hand and he let me take it. We sat together in silence, both of us crying quietly, both of us exhausted from years of distance. The next day, I called a therapist. The receptionist asked what I was seeking help for. I told her I had anxiety and control issues that were destroying my relationships. She scheduled me for the following week. I also called my sister. She answered cautiously. I told her I owed her an apology. I told her I had been critical and cruel and a terrible sister. I told her I was working on changing and I understood if she needed space. She was quiet for a moment, then said she had missed me. She said she had missed the person I used to be. She said she would be willing to try again if I was serious about working on myself. I promised her I was. I called my mother next. That conversation was harder. She had watched me become cold and had tried to address it multiple times. I had dismissed her concerns and created distance. When I apologized, she started crying. She said she had been praying for years that I would see what was happening. She said she had felt like she lost her daughter. She said she would support me through this process. She said she loved me no matter what. Hearing those words broke something else open inside me. I realized how much I had needed to hear them. I realized how much I had needed to believe love could exist without conditions. Margaret continued working, but our relationship had shifted. I stopped giving her excessive tasks. I stopped inspecting her work obsessively. I stopped inventing problems to correct. Instead, I treated her with the respect she deserved. I thanked her genuinely when she completed tasks. I asked her opinion on household matters. I gave her freedom to manage her work without micromanaging. She began to relax around me. She started offering suggestions. She shared stories about her life. She showed me photos of her daughter and talked about her memories. We developed something that resembled friendship within the boundaries of our professional relationship. My therapy sessions were difficult. The therapist helped me understand how my childhood had shaped my adult patterns. She helped me see how anxiety drove my need for control, and how that control created the very chaos I feared. She taught me techniques for managing anxious thoughts. She helped me challenge the voice in my head that demanded perfection. She gave me tools for sitting with discomfort instead of trying to eliminate it. The work was slow and painful. There were sessions where I cried the entire time. There were weeks where I felt like I was making no progress, but gradually things began to shift. Mark noticed the changes. He said I seemed softer. He said I smiled more. He said the tension in the house had decreased. We started having real conversations again instead of surface-level exchanges. We started touching casually again, hands brushing in the kitchen, shoulders touching on the sofa. We started laughing together. One night, he reached for me in bed, and I did not stiffen. We held each other, and I let myself be held. It felt foreign and wonderful. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. I reached out to the maids I had hurt. I found contact information for as many as I could locate. I sent messages apologizing for my behavior. I did not make excuses or try to explain. I simply acknowledged the harm I had caused and expressed genuine regret. Most did not respond. A few replied with acceptance. One replied with anger, listing specific incidents and telling me the job had affected her mental health. I read her message multiple times. I did not defend myself. I thanked her for being honest and apologized again. She did not write back, but I hope she felt some closure. 6 months after Margaret arrived, I hosted a small family dinner. My sister came with her family. My mother came. Mark's parents came. It was the first gathering we had hosted in over a year. I felt anxious about it for days beforehand. Margaret helped me prepare without me asking. She cooked dishes and set the table and made everything look beautiful. Before the guests arrived, I thanked her for everything. She told me I had done the real work. She said the house felt different now. She said it felt like a home instead of a museum. The dinner went well. My nieces and nephews ran through the house, and I did not scold them for being loud. My sister spilled wine on the tablecloth, and I laughed it off. My mother hugged me tight and whispered that she was proud of me. Mark held my hand under the table. When everyone left, the house was messy. There were dishes piled in the sink and crumbs on the floor and cushions askew on the sofa. I looked at the chaos and felt peace instead of panic. Margaret started cleaning up and I told her to stop. I said we could do it tomorrow. She looked surprised and pleased. She said good night and went to her room. Mark and I cleaned up together the next morning. We worked side by side, talking and laughing. He asked if I remembered when we first got married and our apartment was always messy. I said I remembered being happy then. He said he wanted more of that happiness. I said I wanted that too. We finished cleaning and went for a walk in the neighborhood. The weather was beautiful. The sun was warm. The trees were green. I noticed details I had missed before. The flowers in neighbors' yards. The sound of children playing. The smell of fresh-cut grass. Life was happening all around me, and I was finally present for it. My relationship with Margaret evolved into something profound. She was no longer just an employee. She was a friend, a mentor, a mirror reflecting back what I needed to see. She challenged me gently when I slipped into old patterns. She celebrated with me when I made progress. She shared her wisdom about grief and loss and healing. She taught me that strength was not about never breaking. It was about breaking and choosing to rebuild. She taught me that control was an illusion and that real peace came from acceptance. She taught me that perfection was empty and that love required vulnerability. One evening, Margaret came to me and said she needed to talk. My stomach dropped, fearing she was quitting. She sat down and told me her daughter had always wanted to open a bakery. She said she had been saving money for years with that dream in mind. She said she was getting older, and if she did not try now, she never would. She said she wanted to leave my employment to open the bakery her daughter had dreamed of. She said it would honor her daughter's memory and give her purpose. She asked if I understood. I felt sadness, but also joy for her. I told her I understood completely. I told her she had given me more than she knew, and I wanted her to pursue this dream. I asked if there was anything I could do to help. She said just being supportive was enough. We talked about the details. She would stay for 1 more month while I found a new maid and trained them. She would leave on good terms. She would stay in touch if I wanted. I told her I absolutely wanted that. I told her she had saved my life in ways she might never fully understand. She smiled and said I had saved my own life. She had just held up a mirror. The month passed quickly. I interviewed new maids with a completely different approach. I asked about their lives and their families and their dreams. I explained the job honestly without excessive demands. I hired a woman named Rosa, who had 2 young children and needed flexible hours. I told her I valued her as a person first and an employee second. She looked at me with surprise and gratitude. Margaret trained Rosa patiently, teaching her my preferences without making them sound like absolute requirements. She told Rosa that I was working on being better and to be patient with me. Rosa said she would. Margaret's last day arrived. I had prepared a gift for her. It was a donation in her daughter's name to a cancer research fund. I also gave her a framed photo of us taken during the family dinner. She cried when she saw the gifts. She hugged me tightly and told me to keep growing. She told me to be gentle with myself. She told me that healing was not a destination but a practice. She told me she believed in me. We both cried as she walked out the door. But these tears were different from the tears the other maids had shed. These were tears of love and gratitude and bittersweet endings. Rosa started work the next day. I was nervous about the transition. I caught myself wanting to micromanage and had to consciously step back. Rosa was different from Margaret. She was younger and more energetic. She did things her own way. I had to remind myself that different was not wrong. When she organized the pantry differently than I would have, I thanked her for her effort instead of criticizing the method. When she folded towels in a new pattern, I told myself it did not matter. When she played music while cleaning, I let her enjoy her work. She was happy and efficient and brought lightness to the house. Mark noticed immediately that I was handling the change well. He said he was impressed with my progress. He said he could see how hard I was working. He said he felt hopeful about our future. We continued rebuilding our relationship slowly. We went on date nights. We took a weekend trip, just the two of us. We talked about dreams we had set aside. We made plans for the future. We rediscovered the connection that had brought us together in the first place. It was not perfect. We still had difficult conversations. We still had moments of tension, but we faced them together instead of retreating into silence. My therapy continued. I worked on deeper issues related to self-worth and perfectionism and fear. I learned to identify triggers before they spiraled. I learned to ask for help when I needed it. I learned to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of trying to control them away. I learned that vulnerability was not weakness. I learned that making mistakes was human. I learned that I was worthy of love even when I was messy and imperfect and struggling. These lessons did not come easily. They required consistent practice and patience with myself. I stayed in touch with Margaret through text messages and occasional phone calls. She sent me photos of her bakery as it came together. She named it after her daughter. The sign was beautiful, painted in soft colors with elegant lettering. She invited me to the grand opening. I went with Mark and Rosa. The bakery was lovely, filled with the smell of fresh bread and pastries. Margaret looked radiant, flour dusted on her apron, greeting customers with genuine warmth. She introduced me as her friend, not her former employer. I felt honored by the designation. A year after Margaret left, I looked back at who I had been and barely recognized myself. I thought about the woman who watched maids leave in tears and felt nothing. I thought about the woman who valued perfection over people. I thought about the woman who built walls so high she suffocated inside them. That woman seemed like a stranger now. I was not perfect. I still had moments where anxiety flared. I still had days where controlling impulses surfaced, but I caught them faster now. I redirected them more effectively. I asked for support when I needed it. My relationships had transformed. My sister and I talked regularly. My mother visited often. Mark and I were genuinely happy together. Rosa had been with us for a year and showed no signs of leaving. She told me I was the best employer she had ever had. The compliment made me emotional. I thought about how far I had come from the person who made 14 maids cry. I thought about Margaret's gentle patience and her willingness to see past my defenses. I thought about the gift she had given me by refusing to give up. I learned that crying did not make you weak. Margaret had made me cry, but she had not broken me. She had broken through to me. There was a difference. The tears I shed in my kitchen that day were tears of release, not defeat. They washed away years of rigid control and revealed the tender, frightened person underneath. That person needed compassion, not criticism. That person needed grace, not perfection. That person needed to be seen and loved exactly as she was. I began volunteering at a local mental health organization. I shared my story in support groups for people struggling with anxiety and control issues. I talked about my journey from rigidity to flexibility. I talked about the maids I had hurt and the relationships I had damaged. I talked about Margaret and the unexpected way she had saved me. People responded to my honesty. They shared their own stories. We supported each other through the messy process of change. I found purpose in helping others see what I had been blind to for so long. Mark and I decided to renew our wedding vows. It felt important to mark the new chapter in our relationship. We kept it small and intimate, just close family and a few friends. Margaret came and brought pastries from her bakery for the reception. She told me she was proud of me. She said her daughter would have liked me. The words meant everything. During the ceremony, I promised to love Mark with vulnerability and honesty. I promised to choose connection over control. I promised to keep doing the work of becoming better. He made similar promises. We both cried happy tears. Rosa had become part of our family in a real way. She brought her children to work sometimes, and I enjoyed their presence. They drew pictures for me and left them on the counter. They asked me questions and told me stories. I bought them small gifts and celebrated their birthdays. Rosa thanked me for treating her with dignity and respect. She said she had worked for families who treated her as invisible. She said she appreciated being seen as a whole person. I told her I was grateful for her patience with me as I learned to be better. 2 years after Margaret left, I received a call from her. She was crying. My heart sank, fearing bad news. She told me the bakery was thriving beyond her dreams. She was crying from happiness. She said she felt her daughter's presence in the space. She said she woke up every day excited to work. She said she had found peace she never thought possible after losing her child. She thanked me for encouraging her to take the leap. I told her she had done it all herself. She said we had helped each other heal. She was right. I started a journal to track my progress and setbacks. I wrote about difficult days when old patterns resurfaced. I wrote about victories when I chose differently. I wrote letters to the 14 maids I had hurt, even though I would never send them. I wrote what I wished I had said to them. I wrote apologies and acknowledgments. I wrote about the person I had been and the person I was becoming. The journal became a space for honest reflection without judgment. It helped me see patterns and growth I might have missed otherwise. My mother's health began declining. She was diagnosed with heart disease and needed help with daily tasks. I moved her into our home without hesitation. Rosa helped care for her during the day. Mark and I managed evenings and weekends. It was challenging and exhausting. My mother needed patience and flexibility and grace. The old version of me would have crumbled under the pressure. The new version of me met the challenge with love. My mother commented on the change in me multiple times. She said I had become the daughter she always knew was inside. She said she was grateful to see it before she died. My mother passed away peacefully 6 months later. The grief was overwhelming. I leaned on Mark and Rosa and Margaret and my therapist. I let people support me instead of pretending I was fine. I cried openly and often. I talked about my sadness instead of hiding it. I accepted that grief was not something to control or fix. It was something to feel and move through. Margaret attended the funeral and held my hand through the service. She understood loss in ways others could not. Her presence was a comfort. After my mother died, I found letters she had written but never sent. They were addressed to me, dated over the past 5 years. In them, she chronicled her worry about my transformation into someone cold and rigid. She wrote about feeling helpless to reach me. She wrote about praying constantly for my healing. She wrote about the joy she felt when I finally started changing. The last letter, written a week before she died, expressed pride and love and forgiveness. She wrote that she understood I had been suffering and she was sorry she had not understood sooner. She wrote that she loved me unconditionally and always would. I read the letters through tears and felt grateful she had seen my transformation before she left. 3 years after Margaret made me cry in my kitchen, I was a fundamentally different person. I still employed Rosa, and we had developed a genuine friendship. I still saw my therapist monthly for maintenance. I still practiced the tools I had learned for managing anxiety. I still caught myself slipping into old patterns occasionally, but I caught them faster and redirected more easily. The work of healing was ongoing. It would always be ongoing. That was okay. Margaret's Bakery had become a community gathering place. She hosted events and supported local charities. She employed other women who had experienced loss and needed purpose. She had created something beautiful from her pain. We had coffee together every few weeks. She asked about my progress, and I asked about her business. We shared the comfortable intimacy of people who had seen each other at their worst and loved each other anyway. She remained one of my most treasured friends. I thought often about the moment when everything changed. The moment when Margaret asked if I was happy and I could not answer. The moment when she held my hand and told me about her daughter. The moment when I finally let myself break open and cry. That moment had cost me nothing and given me everything. It had cost me the illusion of control and given me real peace. It had cost me rigid perfection and given me messy authenticity. It had cost me isolation and given me connection. The 14 maids who left in tears had every right to their hurt. I could not undo the damage I had caused them. I could only acknowledge it, learn from it, and commit to being better. Some wounds could not be fully healed. Some relationships could not be restored. That was a consequence I had to accept. The work of redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about changing the future. It was about breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. It was about choosing growth over defense. I understood now that my cruelty had never been about the maids. It had been about me, my fear, my anxiety, my desperate need to control an uncontrollable world. The maids had been convenient targets for internal pain I did not know how to process. That did not excuse my behavior. It explained it.